Hello and welcome to today's stream. We're talking all about data protection on Kubernetes. Uh, Quite often, you might be asked, do you really have a backup if you've not actually tested it and gone through that process? I've never really had a backup of my Kubernetes data. I don't know about you, but today we're going to be looking at what Kasten can offer. They have a data protection solution that can back up your apps and your data persistent volumes, and it uses some really clever tech like CSI. So I'm going to bring on Michael Cade, who's a senior technologist and evangelist at Veeam, and also works a lot with Kasten in his day job. He's going to help me walk through a new arcade app.
Hey Alex.
Hello, Michael.
Hey Alex, how's it going?
It's going well. It's pretty dreary weather at the moment because you're not too far away from me in Peterborough, are you?
Yeah, it is, but hopefully the service stays up and we can show some cool stuff.
Yeah. So, what do you do at Kasten?
So my focus there is really about evangelizing or advocating around what we do from a Kubernetes data management point of view. So I've been at Veeam for over 6 years now, coming up 7 actually. So my focus around data management in general started around infrastructure and virtual machines and general unstructured data, and then more recently moved into more of the cloud native space, which I've been saying for the last year is it's the same but a little bit different when it comes to data management. So Kasten is a company that Veeam acquired in October 2020. And so we've had them for just over a year. Great team, great engineering team, but also a very different focus to that virtualization space that I'm traditionally used to. But again, the same problems, same challenges around data management are still there, especially when you're working with stateful workloads, data services such as databases or messaging queues, etc., that you kind of need to keep hold of for protection purposes.
Increasingly, we have seen Kubernetes running these kinds of workloads. There was the stateful set that came about that's designed to sort of help scale databases and queues, like you were talking about, things that just need to stay around that can't scale in the same way as pods do, and stateless services. So I guess this is really something you need to think about if you're not using a managed service for those things, right?
Yeah, and I think that's the ever increasing conversation that we're having around stateless versus stateful. Hopefully, we're a bit past that now, in that, like you've mentioned, Kubernetes have rolled into stateful sets and the ability to create those persistent volume claims, but then also the unearthing of like the CSI. That all helps drive the capability of being able to have that data service within your Kubernetes cluster. But I think another thing that we'll touch on is very much around not all data services will live within the cluster, and you'll absolutely use and leverage other data services, such as something like AWS RDS. And how do we protect the whole application? Because it's all well and good just going and protecting AWS RDS on its own and having a consistent copy of that database, but how does it know everything else about that application? So we kind of need to look at it at a bigger picture level as well.
Yeah. So today, anybody that's watching this live or watching it later on, what we've got for you is we're going to talk about the Kasten app that was developed in Arcade. It's going to be, this is already available if you want to use it in Arcade. Arcade Kasten is the new sponsored app. Within that, you can install the K10 operator for Kubernetes, and there's a few utilities around there on how to make it just a bit easier, like the pre-flight checks to make sure your cluster is working as it should. Briefly touch a bit more on what Kasten is useful for as we look at that blog post. I've got a demo where we set up OpenFaaS and then install some marketing functions so that we can offer, basically, in exchange for an email address, we can offer you 20% discount on an ebook. Now, you can try that if you want. That's not really the point of it. The point of that example is to show you that we're collecting data into a table, Postgres, also installed with Arcade. And then I'm going to back that up with Kasten. I'm going to get a local snapshot of that. After that, if we've got time, we'll go over to Michael, who's going to show us how to then take those snapshots that have been made locally and get them offsite. Now that's something that I've always heard of. I mean, do you know the back best practice sort of 1 2? Is it 1 2 3?
3, 2, 1. So
3
close,
2 1.
right? So 3 copies of your data on 2 different media types, and one of them being offsite. And this is kind of where I was going at, is that the same but different, is that those methodologies against failure scenarios still happen in our cloud native worlds, the same as what they do in any other physical, virtual, unstructured data. So that's really our key methodology that, I mean, I've been saying as a data management or advocate for protecting data, but I think it's a methodology that regardless of the tool that you're using, you should, if you can follow them, then you're likely to be safe when a failure scenario happens. I think that's the key point to that.
Okay. So this is a blog post that was sponsored in late November, and it's part of a kind of collaboration between Kasten and OpenFAS, a paid project. And one of the things that I noticed looking at the docs originally for Kasten was that there was just a lot of things you had to do to get it installed. And then some of the flags and settings were this dot that dot the other dot server dot persistence dot enabled, and they were quite difficult to remember. And I remember with OpenFAS we had similar stuff in our Helm chart, and so rather than setting the OpenFAS chart values YAML to I think it was gateway dot replicas 3, we're able to just put a high level flag on an app for OpenFAS. And arkade apps most of the time are a wrapper for Helm. Sometimes with Istio, for instance, we will download the Istio CLI. That does the installation. For MetalLB, it just deploys MetalLB static YAML files. And so that's one of the main differences in the user experience that you'll see. Where I think it has shown value is, as you'll see in my demo, is if you wanted a TLS endpoint for OpenFAS, K10, OpenFAS itself, and Postgres, you can get all of them in what's effectively 5 commands there. Now, in the old way of doing things, this would take you much longer, probably the best part of a day. I know, Michael, you recently wrote a lab for installing similar software to this. How long did that take you?
Yeah, it does, and that's the whole point. Is everyone's trying to simplify these steps, right? To make it easier to get to the more complex stuff that we actually want to have hands on and actually make a difference and see the software or see the solution that we actually want to touch. So that's a big reason for that.
So by having your app here, not only do you get to install your app a little bit easier than before, it's discoverable by arkade users. But one thing is that very rarely you're going to just want one thing in your lab or test environment or when you're working locally. And so, like, I never just want Postgres. I always need some other things there, like Cert Manager or Traffic. And so by having them in one place, it just makes that a lot faster. Now, for your app, we should probably mention that there's a free tier for this solution. And correct me if I'm wrong, you can use it effectively as long as you like with up to 10 nodes.
Yeah. So 10 worker nodes, so not including any control plane nodes that you have or storage nodes that you have within your cluster. Just 10 worker nodes that are holding your application, obviously holding your data, and it's free forever. And basically, the only difference between that and a commercially or a proprietary license is the enterprise support, the level of support. But that doesn't mean that you're out on your ear. Like if you're a home user dabbling around from a technologist point of view, we'll still help you. It's just not going to be to the SLA that you get from an enterprise agreement, which I think is a lot of companies out there that are doing the same type of license.
Yeah.
The 10 worker nodes should cover you for quite a big.
It cover me. I mean, it could cover my Raspberry Pi cluster if I could run it there. Now we've got a few people turned up. We've got Deshaun, Arijit again. Good to see you, and and Talha, who has actually contributed to Arcade, and he's telling us that we can actually install Ketchup with Arcade. Yeah. So the other part that we haven't got to yet, which we also did through this project, was to add some apps. I don't know if we actually mention it in the blog post, but basically there's a few open source CLI utilities that are useful with Kasten, and we added them to Arcade Get as part of the project. So you can Arcade Get kubectl, helm, and then you can also get those extra utilities. So let's get back into the blog post. So yeah, we added 3 to 5 utilities. When I looked at the product, basically the 3 use cases I saw, what we saw on the homepage. You can backup and restore volumes. Now there are other tools that can do this, some open source, but I liked the way that it uses CSI. Can you tell us why CSI is important?
Yeah, I think it's the de facto way, the way in which all storage vendors, both on-prem and cloud providers, are going to be leveraging that same framework. I think another thing here is around like application consistency. I know we'll get into that as well, but yeah, that's really the focus. Now we can protect workloads that are not using the CSI driver or the CSI interface, but it's going to be much quicker, much faster by using the CSI angle here.
I mean, I think that there's more to it than that. One of the things that I noticed CSI supports is this idea of a snapshot.
Yeah, exactly that. So now, even if you're not using CSI, we do have generic volume snapshot, which is us creating a copy of that data. But that's why it's a bit slower, because we can't lean on the framework that's there. From a CSI point of view, they have something, the volume snapshot and the volume snapshot class, that gives us the ability to trigger those volume snapshots. And that's both on-prem, and I see Alex looking up minicube here, and this is where I've written a lot of my stuff, or not. I've not written that, but I've kind of put it together so that we can easily build our own Kubernetes or Kasten K10 demo environment locally, which I know a lot of local developers use. And the CSI driver is a simple add-on when it comes to this. So the ability to leverage those volume snapshots as a very fast way of recovery, but then also be able to take those snapshots and export them out to S3 or to a secondary location target is.
Let's explain
really
what snapshot is. So with minikube, which is a local Kubernetes that you can install, you're probably using a local path provisioner, maybe the host path driver. Specifically, the CSI version of this supports volume snapshots. Now, what this means is that, let's say you have a persistent volume, and this is what Michael's talking about, where you have your queue, maybe your database. What would the queue be? Maybe NATS. Maybe the database would be the Postgres example. We set up a persistent volume claim. Now, the claim is saying, I want to have a persistent volume. Can you effectively create one for me? I need one. This is how it should work. Then the provider of that volume will create the volume, and it has a size, whether it's bound or not. And at that point in time, that could be used in your application. So let's say that we're writing messages. I'm going to show you my sign up app later. We'll be signing up. You'll be putting your email address in. Once you've confirmed it, you'll get a discount for my ebook. Let's say that I shut down my computer and I lost that minikube cluster. I would have lost your emails. So you might have to confirm it again. Well, this is what I really liked, because this is a very progressive tutorial. You can do it without any other stuff on your cluster. Create a volume snapshot custom resource. Say what the name is, what the source is, so the PVC that is coming off. And then what will happen is that specific volume will get snapshotted. The first time, it's going to be the total size, effectively. The second time you snapshot this, if we had 10 more people sign up, it's only going to be that delta, so possibly just a few kilobytes. And that's where this becomes really smart when you come to do your backups, is that I can then restore that specific snapshot through a delta. And so this tutorial I thought was really cool, because it just walks you through it with kubectl. And Kasten, correct me if I'm wrong, effectively automates all of this and can then drain off that data to offsite for you.
Exactly that. So if you think about Kasten as that volume orchestrator at that point, and then being able to orchestrate that off into whatever that location profile needs to look like, whether it's S3. But yeah, that's exactly what we're doing under the hood. Is we're taking that, we're leveraging the CSI capabilities. We're taking a volume snapshot. What we also have is something called Canister, which is also we've put that into the arkade get as well. I know we're not going to cover it, but that's what we can leverage. So if you've got Postgres, which Alex will show in his demo, if you've got Postgres being used and you require application consistency, i.e., we want to leverage PG dump to take a consistent copy of the data that we have within that, we could leverage Canister both either as a standalone open source project, or Kasten K10 uses Canister to be able to orchestrate that as well. So
hang on a minute. I don't think I realized this when I was exploring the project. So you're telling me that application consistent means you're not just dumping the volume, you're actually logging into that SQL instance. You're doing a PG dump against it. So you've got it in the proper format.
Exactly that. So Canister has, so the concept of Canister, it has blueprints. So if you've got Postgres, we've got a blueprint for Postgres. But ultimately, you can write your own blueprint. So to do anything that you really want to drive into your backup methodology. So I think that will be I don't think we've shouted about it enough as an open source project, but expect to see a lot more of that over 2022.
Well, I mean, it's a classic business play, isn't it? The business model is that you have an engine, some open source code, you then build a product, an added value product on top of that. I also, correct me if I'm wrong, know that the exports use a tool Restic. Is that right?
No, in fact we use Copia. So
Copia. So you don't use Restic at all?
No.
Okay.
Some others do. Copia is a similar data mover. There's some stats out there that show the differences between them. But yeah, we basically use Copia. There are other options out there, but we use Copia as our predominant data mover to lift and shift from A to B the backup data.
So let's get into demo now that we've got a few people ready here.
Cool.
What I will do is use Arkade to get minicube, and the reason we're using minicube is because it has the CSI add-on. We don't get that add-on if we're using
Kind or
something like Kind, let's say. So that's why it's important for us. And I'm just going to pop that down there. So I don't have a Kubernetes cluster. What I'm going to do is Arkade get minicube. And I'm specifying a version now. This is something that you couldn't do with Arkade easily before. And I can also actually put more than one sort of CLI in at the same time. So we want kubectl at v1 21.1, and then I could put helm if I wanted that as well, kubester, canister, etc. Things that we've talked about. Let's just get this down.
Which actually condenses your 5 lines of different apps and tools, Alex. It condenses that down right into potentially 2 or 3.
Yeah. So what we're doing now is we're going to actually do the first part from the post, which is to set up minikube in such a way that we have this CSI host path driver, but also the volume snapshots. And to add them to minikube, there are instructions in a Kasten docs. It's just this is a little bit easier. So let's start my minikube. Now, I believe the driver that is going to be defaulted will be the Docker driver. Minikube can also run with KVM if you're a Linux user, VirtualBox, etc. It's improved drastically since I last used it. It's had a lot of love, lots of emojis now as well. Do you like emojis in your CLIs? Let us know in the comments.
Yeah. This is kind of something that I wanted to bring up as well around the project pace while this is building out. I wanted an easy way for the community to get hold of K10, which is ultimately why we're speaking about Arkade. But then also, how do we get it up and running quick? And minikube and obviously kubectl and Kasten, all of these different applications or deployments need to happen, CLIs need to happen. So this is the base of, well, basically everything that Alex is showing is what I've put into Project Pace, which is just a simple single cluster, but I'm working on a multi-cluster deployment as well, which will go out and deploy exactly that minicube environment and allow us to see and actually look at K10.
So what we now have is that we're all up and running. We've got the host path CSI storage class. I don't know if anybody's ever run this command before. I don't run it that often. And we've also got a volume snapshot class as well. These are the add-ons that were configured for us. But what we want to do is want to annotate the volume snapshot class so that Kasten is aware that it can use it. It seems to already have it in the correct context. We are. Okay. Let me just see if I've got anything in here. That's strange. I seem to have everything already, Michael. So minicube. Actually need to delete my old minicube. I thought I deleted it. I'd only stopped it. So there's no cheating allowed. So P is a profile in this instance so that you can have more than one minicube. So let's get that fully deleted. We'll create it again. And let me just start that in the background. Okay, so whilst that's starting, the other thing that we do is we patch the storage class. Basically tell it that the host path is now the standard, the CSI driver, and the default is not. If we don't do that, then we'll get persistent volumes, but we won't have snapshots enabled on them. Kasten can still back them up, but it can't do that really smart trick of being able to do a delta. Because let's say, I think the default for Postgres was 8 GB volume. Do you really want to update 8 gig volume on your S3 bucket every time you change one line in your database table? Probably not. What this allows us to do is just go direct in surgically and only change that one delta, a bit like how a Docker image uses layers. So the last part of this is verifying the host path add-on. Again, we can actually get minikube from arkade. kubectl is there as well. We pass the add-on that I mentioned. And we're using Kubernetes 121. I believe 122 support for that's coming soon, isn't it?
Yeah, there's a few major API changes that is just delaying our supportability there. But yeah, it's coming very, very soon.
Major API changes in Kubernetes, yeah. This stuff does happen, and it can create a big maintenance burden. So yeah, I've mentioned that in the blog post. So let's go through this again. Let's get our storage class. We'll see the default is that standard, the one that's not CSI compatible. So we're going to annotate our volume snapshot class, patch these around, effectively saying CSI is now default. And then we're back to arkade again. So arkade has this new Kasten subcommand. One of the other subcommands we have is Venify for the other sponsored app. And these generally are for commercial solutions rather than open source. So Kasten was no different. And we have an info and install command. In the install command, we have 2 subcommands. We might add more. The first is pre-flight. And what this does, it downloads a pre-flight checking script, runs that through your cluster. What the script actually does, you can find out by running pre-flight -- dry run, and then it will print out the whole script for you. So you can check it and see if you actually want to run it or not. So this is now checking my cluster. So far, so good. And then after we've done a pre-flight, we'll actually install the K10 app. Now, there are quite a lot of options in the Helm chart. We should probably add a link here, Michael, after the show. One of the things I want to do is enable what's called token authentication. This is where a Kubernetes service account will be created. with its own token, and we will use that to access the Kasten UI and dashboard rather than just a basic auth password like you might do with the open source version of OpenVAS. And if we do -help, we get to see a sample installation command. There's an end user license agreement. We can agree to that. There's a cluster name. So if you don't want the default, we can do things like turn Prometheus on and off. Now,
yeah, there's so the Helm chart values, obviously, depending on which one is docs.kasten.io. That's where, and we'll put the link in the blog. But I think if you're using an EKS cluster or you're using AKS, there's obviously different Helm values that you'd potentially put in there, and that's where we're using them. But for this demo, we can get away with the token auth. I mean, if you've got a load balancer, we can add that in, and there's lots of different options that you can put in there.
There is one option that we wanted, because on minicube, even though we are actually using CSI driver, it's still not exactly the same as how it would be in the public cloud.
True.
With something like EKS. So what a friend of mine, Tamal from KubeDB, was explaining earlier is that when you use the specific driver, all of the files are available as root. So if you then use a non-root user for your container, it can't write to them. Now that doesn't happen in kubeadmin and in the cloud and one thing and another, but in minikube, that's just the way it is. So one of the things we're going to do when we install Postgres is it actually has a special configuration that will update the volume permissions on that volume so that that specific Postgres user can write to its volume. Again, this is part of the experience here. We've gone through this stuff. We've built this lab, this workshop, so that it just works when you want to try this stuff out. There's nothing quite like sort of sitting there wondering if it's you or the tutorial that's wrong, is there? Now, Kasten will install quite a few bits and pieces for us. So the best way of finding out when it's done is this rollout status. I don't know. People in the comments, have you used kubectl rollout status? Really useful. You can specify an object you want to become ready, and it will just block. If it takes more than a default timeout, you can extend it. You can put custom conditions here too. And the other thing that's kind of cool is rollout restart. So if you've got a deployment and you want to have it re-pull its image, you can scale it to 0 and 1 again, or you can do rollout restart. So again, useful commands. So that's done. Now, the message that we're actually seeing here is from Arkade. The Arkade app told us how to use this thing. And it's even got the port forward. So we don't have to go to the docs. If you ever want this message again, just do arkade kasten info arkade K10, and we get it back again. So are you still there with us, Michael?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Excellent. So this is what you do in your sleep probably by now. We're going to port forward the UI. And pay attention to the URLs. This has got me a number of times. Is if you don't add K10 and a hash, it won't work. I'm going to open that up. And I use a different port because I need OpenVAS as well. And then it's saying, give me your token. So the token is in, I think it's in the blog post, the command for that.
Yeah. While you're grabbing that, Alex, as well, so there is an option to have an external gateway. So if you're using, especially a cloud offering where load balancers are built in, you could have that set on that initial deployment. You can say use an external gateway. It will go and deploy that, and it will deliver you a public IP on that load balancer as well. I mean, It all depends on your environment. Again, we're using minikube here. If you've got a load balancer, and that's going to come down again to some nuances with minikube and the operating system that you're running, and whether you're using Docker or VMware, like some are it's
Yeah,
very
and that's all in your documentation. So
yeah.
if you want to do something special, go there. So it's popped up. This is the UI. If I head into applications, I first have to give my details. This is for my trial, I take it. And then I can go create a policy. I can see, are there any resources that can be backed up yet? No. So don't want to go premature here. But basically, this is the tutorial that shows you how to get that arkade app set up. And then it's over to you. Now, I did mention at the end, why not deploy Postgres and try out a few functions, collect some data. So that's what we're actually going to do now. So I've got some commands that I saved from earlier. Effectively, I've got a register function where you can put in an email address. It will then send you an email via the email function. You will then get a link to the confirm function, which will then show you the secret URL for getting a 20% discount on my ebook. Now, this is just an example of what kind of automation you could create with OpenFaaS, marketing automation. So I want to install Postgres. This is what we'll be backing up. And I've set that volume permissions that we mentioned earlier. So it's got the proper permissions. It can change its own volumes. At the end of arkade install, we get loads of commands that sort of help us get started. One of those is how to get the password. I'm going to save that in a file because now I'm going to install OpenFaaS in this cluster. I'm going to need that for one of the functions. Whilst that's happening in the background, I'm going to port forward Postgres locally. Well, I'm going to have to wait for it to start first. Once it's started, then I can port forward it. And I want to create my schema. Stateful set. Contain image has to download from the internet, has to start up, get its volume attached. On the other side of the screen, we have OpenFaaS, and it has its own info message again. Tells exactly what to do. It has that rollout status. Again, this is really useful for any automation you want to do, maybe in a CI system. Port forward again. The reason that I like port forwards is that it just works. So on EKS, you may get an ALB that's going to cost you, I don't know, $25 a month. It takes about 5 to 10 minutes to come up. The port forward is instant. You can also play around with a node port. The port forward will work on every Kubernetes that you've got. So that's why we use it in the tutorials. So on this side, I'm going to log into OpenFaaS, and there's a lot of things going on at the moment. And then I'm going to use a CLI just to list the functions. There's nothing there yet. That's great. Postgres is up. Let's go ahead and port forward Postgres. Now I can create my schema. So the schema is part of my project. And it has ID, email, whether you're confirmed, when it was updated. So it's quite simple, really. And then we can see our data tables. It's there. And we've not got any data in it yet, as expected. Next thing for me to do is to create a whole bunch of secrets. Remember, we've got 4 functions. Each of them needs secrets and configuration. They do various different things. So we've got a Postgres password. Let's get that in there. We've got a access key and token so that I can send you an email via SES. We've got a path ID for the admin page so that nobody can kind of grab all of those emails and then make a GDPR complaint. And we have a secret URL, and that's the discount code that's going to get emailed to you if you go through the marketing flow. And I guess, Michael, you'll be doing that for us. And anybody on the stream, if you want to have a go as well, be appreciated. Deploy my functions. And now I would effectively be able to call that up. As soon as it gets deployed to OpenFaaS, it's got to get pulled down. The container image has to get pulled down and run. we would see a response back. Let's have a look at our functions in the meantime. Should be running now unauthorized, effectively because this function needs secret in its title, in its URL. And it might be that I have that misconfigured, but all the rest of the stuff is going to work for us. So here's the registration page. It says 10%. I think it's actually 20% that I did. Put your email in. Now, classic problem, Michael, how am I going to get you to 127001? I can give you this link, but I don't think it's going to work, is it?
Won't work unless I'm running it, right? And it won't be the same system. So
yeah,
some sort of inlet.
This is the solution. I have an Inlets Pro HTTP client. I've got an inlet server already running with a custom domain. I'm just going to expose this as gateway exit server openfaz.io. I run my tunnel, and then we should be able to get to that the same path, and there it is. So I'm going to share this. We're all going to see several screens here, and we'll come back and answer the questions in a moment. Now, some people have said audio was a bit spotty. I don't know.
I think it might be just connection. Alex,
Okay.
I don't think there's anything
Sorry
else.
about that banner. I just saw that message as well. Apparently, people weren't able to see through the banner. So there's the registration link. I put the word curl by accident, but if you guys want to go to that, effectively, you will see this page.
Cool. I should be in there.
Stick your email in it. And what does it say afterwards? Well, let me try as well. I'll use mine. Thank you. So thanks for submitting it. Check your email. So let's have a look at the table. Michael's in there and I'm in there, but you can see the confirmed field is false. So this seems like a good time for us to make a backup whilst other people maybe have a try and get themselves in. So let me close that. Over on the applications, we have OpenFaz, OpenFaz FN. I could create a policy to back these up, but as you know, OpenFaz is largely stateless. So really all we're backing up is the configuration. And from my perspective, I'd probably rather use a tool like Argo CD or Flux to manage the application, but I want to back up the actual data. So I'm going to my default namespace. I should have data, Postgres 8 gigs. Right, and this is the PVC that we were talking about before in Kubernetes. That's what I want to back up.
So one of the questions, Alex, as well, was around Kasten discovers what can be backed up. I answered, but it's worth mentioning here is that we're discovering basically the applications, the namespaces that you have within your cluster. Now, as well to Alex's point around Argo CD, because that's going to give you the version control and the CD pipeline to update and do what you need to do there. We should also see a lot of customers actually, if they push their whole application into a namespace, they'll just protect it all anyway, because there's some other stuff that we have that gives us the ability to make the application maybe more mobile, so we can move it from one cluster to another, different storage classes. And by us just having that code base, that gives us the ability to clone that quite quickly and bring up all of the config as well.
Yeah, there's definitely that motility aspect. Let's see what else people are talking about. So Carlos, great to see you. One of my GitHub sponsors. Is there a new version of Arkade? Well, that's a good question. Generally, with Arkade, there's a new version every few days. You don't have to download it every few days, but if you run Arkade update, it will print a message and you can just download it. You'll get whatever we've put into it. You've got release notes as well. Sorry about the banner, Engin. That's gone now. Hopefully the audio is all right for people now. And yeah, how do we discover what's actually there? Well, that's what I just had up on the screen. One last sort of question is, before we go and actually create that class, what's the difference between Kasten and Longhorn?
Yeah, so if you think about Longhorn's providing you block storage, so you're underpinning commodity storage. So it's a software defined storage option, obviously from Rancher, whereas Kasten is storage agnostic. We live within the Kubernetes cluster, and we're mostly about how do we protect that data, that Postgres data, that important information, offload that to a different location so that if any failure scenario was to happen, we've got the ability to recover that. Now, from a Longhorn point of view, yes, there's snapshot functionality. In fact, the first tutorial that Alex went through about creating a persistent volume, creating a snapshot, you can absolutely do that, but nobody wants to be running cron jobs and scripts to be able to do that. That's where Kasten comes in to really help expedite that and just really take that pain point away.
It orchestrates it for you, doesn't it? And
Exactly.
it's got it. So Longhorn is a network file system that you can install on Kubernetes. Kasten is the tool that will back it up for you.
Yeah, exactly that.
Now, also, like, there's that motility element that perhaps where Argo, could do that for you too. But what we're talking about, maybe more enterprise use cases, you have maybe a multi-cloud and a disaster recovery environment.
So I've done a session as well on Argo CD and integrating backups into your CD pipeline. So everything that Kasten has, whether it's backup actions, import actions that we haven't really touched on, we can obviously use that. Everything that Kasten does is included in the Kubernetes API. Kasten is deployed within the Kubernetes cluster, and it lives there from a CRD perspective. So everything from an API perspective can be then called by the CD pipeline. So I actually did it on Argo CD as well.
Tyler's also asking, could it back up a network file system? I'm not sure which one he means, but go for it.
Yeah, it'd be interesting to know what the focus is, but really any PVC that's displayed, we've got the ability to protect that. The other thing as well that we won't show is, and I think I was touching on this around AWS RDS, obviously not all clusters contain the data service, so we've got the ability to protect that as well, which is done via config maps to map to that RDS instance.
Okay. So I'm now creating my backup for those rows. We know that we've got false for both of us. Nobody else has had a go at this yet. You get 20% off. Take it or leave it. It's just a demo. Right. So I want a snapshot rather than importing data. I think that I would just do this daily, and then I can actually specify now resources by name, by Kubernetes label. So maybe stuff deployed by Helm or none. I just want the default namespace here and all the resources. Again, we can filter them down, and there's some smart behavior. You can do include, exclude. What I want to show you is I should just be able to get a snapshot volume created and orchestrated by Kasten. If I get snapshots, I'm trying to remember
volume snapshots,
and we don't have any yet.
Yeah.
So this running man will run this now, so you haven't got a data wait. And then on the activity dashboard, we'll see it pop up on this graph running. So we're getting real-time feedback here, the amount of artifacts, etc. I think we can dig into it, get a bit more detail, can't we?
Yeah, and I guess so. This is just going to be creating that really fast restore point for Alex on his local minicube cluster. There is an option there to export to your S3 bucket location as well. That if we get time, I'll jump into that as well.
Can you now go ahead and confirm your email? And we should see the database table change.
Yeah, let me dive in there.
So you'll get a link, and that will give you your discount code, what have you, take you to Gumroad. Should see.
Sales at OpenFaz, click here. Thank you for confirming your email.
Right, so now we've got true in the table. And all that was all happening over the Inlets tunnel. There's our original snapshot. And now we can do run once again. If we find it's our policy we want, isn't it?
Yeah. Under the policy, running man.
And I think the second one's obviously going to be a lot quicker because this is just a snapshot, a delta between the two. And Kubernetes and the storage driver are doing this, the heavy lifting.
Yeah, one of the things that we found is the reporting of this. It says that it's a full-blown copy. It's not. Don't worry, you're not going to use all the storage up on your laptop or on your system.
There we go. There's that one where you've confirmed yours and I haven't. And if I restored this snapshot, we'd go back to the state where neither of us have confirmed it. And we might want to do that perhaps if the email code, my password was wrong for SES, and I wanted to go back to an earlier snapshot so that you could retry the action rather than me hacking the database rows. So that is where I want you to draw what I've done to a close. Is I've shown you summarize a register function that you put your email into, that emailed you a link, you confirm that updated you in the database, gave you the code. List function, I couldn't show you, didn't have the auth token, but we showed you it through SQL. And that's all running with Postgres in cluster, with a volume. We did a snapshot of that, and we accessed it through an Inlets tunnel. So now I've got these snapshots. What I really want to do is, remember we said 3, 2, 1. We want the 2 media types. We want to go off site. Does S3 count as a different media type to my hard drive? I think it does.
Yeah,
it's definitely off site as well, isn't it? I mean, it's not.
Yeah. So the other thing that I've done with this project pace though is put MinIO inside of the same cluster, which that would be the same media type. It's the same hard disk if you go and deploy that, but it just gives us the functionality testing that enables us to see what it does. But yeah, we've got the ability to offload into cloud storage, so object storage, Amazon S3 compatible, Azure Blob, Google Cloud Storage, etc. But then also NFS. So
NFS, yeah.
NFS, and also coming very soon for those like enterprise and commercial customers, the ability to go to a Veeam backup and replication repository. So if you've got part of your team concentrating on virtual machine backups, maybe you've invested in a dedupe appliance, and then they maybe want to push it off into tape and some other weird and wonderful storage medias to comply to regulation, then you can do that as well. So, but I see from a lab point of view or from a dev point of view, probably just getting that off into an AWS S3 bucket or Azure or another. Wasabi have some really good S3 capabilities in the cloud as well.
So we have about 12 minutes left. I wondered if you could show us that part in action. When I add you, or if you minimize your view of things, I'll handle the comments this time around.
Let me. Oh, sorry.
Okay.
You should be able to see.
I've got a nice white screen now.
Okay.
We've got your StreamYard.
Right, that's wrong then. Stop. Share screen. Window. Bring that up. Seamless. That one.
If anybody does want to try out that function, you can do while you're. I'll take it down after the demo because it's running on my local machine. Okay, here we go. Michael's screen.
Yeah, so there's a couple of ways to show this. So this is obviously the same interface. This is again running on a minicube cluster on my local machine. You can see some of the areas. When it comes to a policy, I pretty much have a production app. This is actually I think my MySQL versus Postgres, but obviously the same premise. But as you can see here, if I go through it, one thing that Alex did was just select this action of snapshots, which is obviously fine if you don't need to get that offsite or you don't want to. You just want a quick way of being able to roll your data service back to where it was and locally. And if your machine dies or that the Kubernetes cluster, the minikube cluster dies, you're okay with that. Like there's not that important data in there. But then there's this other radio button here with enable backups via snapshots. So you get to choose which you want to you want to throw into that bucket of storage. And then you've got the ability to say which export location profile. I only have one set up here called S3 US East 2 and MC Kasten. And then you can say, how long do you want to keep things for? So I'm just keeping it very simple for demo purposes, but it might be, I literally want to keep 24-hourly snapshots locally for really fast recovery. And then here, because of regulation, because of whatever, I want to do a custom retention as well. Then, depending on the snapshots that you're using, so EBS snapshots are different to what we see.
That's the retention locally, isn't it, Mike?
This is so backup frequency and snapshot retention is the local. This enable backups via snapshot exports. Exports are what we call that copy of data that we're exporting out into S3. So we've got two different schedules if you want them, or just keep it simple with.
And do you have retention on the exported snapshots as well? How does that work?
So we're basically saying how long we keep it for in the bucket.
So that happens in your local cluster, does it? That's actually querying the bucket on a periodic basis and deleting, trimming off data.
Yeah, yeah, exactly that. So
okay.
we're gonna. The first one is always going to be a full backup. Then thereafter is incremental. So we're just keeping an eye on what that needs to look like, and monitoring what that retention says within this policy. Again, going back to depending on what the snapshot functionality is within the public cloud or within the Kubernetes cluster. So, for example, EBS snapshots are necessarily durable snapshots, so they can be moved between different clusters, different regions, etc. I should use regions versus clusters because it's confusing. Yeah. But regions, as in I can take an EBS snapshot, I can put it somewhere else, I can see the full contents of that data, which means they're durable snapshots. So it might be that for our export, I don't need a full copy of that. I just want to export the snapshot references because everything's going to be self-contained within AWS, and that's what we want to achieve. Like that's what we need.
Okay. And this is your policy? Is it one that you've been running already?
Yeah. So my production app, all resources, pretty much the same as what you had. The only option that I haven't included is the location profile for the canister action. So that PG dump.
And that's area. For anything that's application specific. Are there is it just Postgres and PG dump, or are there other application specific things that can run?
So there's quite a few. Redis, there's Kafka, there's MongoDB, there's RDS in AWS. There's quite a few on the canister. If you go to canister.io, that gives
I'll put a link for that. And
that'll give you that.
Does the opposite work as well? If you wanted to sort of application restore.
Yeah, exactly that. Yeah. So that gives us the ability to restore back into the native application that we're protecting. Another thing to mention here, just on the backup, that let's say that you're so Alex touched on it actually. So we're doing it by name. So everything in my production app namespace is going to get captured via this. I'm not excluding anything. I'm just saying all resources.
Yeah.
The by labels gives us the ability to choose multiple copies, and it might be that you have something like gold, silver, bronze. Terrible profile naming, but it seems to work from a talk track point of view. You could come in here, you could create a policy, and let's say that we don't just have one Kubernetes cluster. Let's say that we have 100. So we've got to deploy Kasten K10 into 100 different clusters. We've obviously also here got the YAML output for that. So you could go and take that policy, modify it as little as possible, and throw that into your other clusters. And then that runs away, and that's then going off to S3. But what you'll see here with Alex is we had backup, which is the snapshot that we're having locally. And then here you can see that we're exporting out to our S3 location. And everything's going out because it looks and feels the same as what it does. The location, just to quickly take a quick look at that, is
it's under the profiles, isn't it?
Yeah,
just made your screen a bit bigger so people can see.
That way around.
Yeah.
So under settings and under location profiles, you go to new profile. You obviously give it a name. Then you choose Amazon S3. What we also added quite recently is the ability to leverage the AWS or the S3 object lock API, so we could do that here as well. If it was that important data, then you could make sure that no one can tamper with that. What else do we have in here? A few things to look at, but under usage and reports, so I want to have some visibility of what I'm actually protecting, what I'm doing. So we want to see this is that misprint of this is just how minicube shows those snapshots for us. You can see there are giga-times, meaning they're full.
Seems like you've got a fan already. So Dashawn is really liking this. This is great.
Good stuff.
And we got some dedupe going on there as well.
Yeah, so inline. So when we throw, I don't know if I should use the term throw. Export our data, our backups, our snapshots to S3. Then we're going to look at our own, or this is using that data mover that we first mentioned around Copia. It's going to leverage the dedupe and compression engine there and give you that forefront of what's going on. This is literally a couple of hours old, so you can't see much of the data in there. And then another important thing, and I kind of asked for this to be at the top because, especially in more traditional environments, infrastructures, people don't know their change rate. And I'm not sure the people that really need to know that data management really know or need to know that either. But having an understanding of, well, if I'm 1 gig in size or 1 terabyte in size and I'm growing at 5% over a week or over a month, that gives us the capability of being able to understand what that OpEx model looks like from a cost perspective. So yeah,
okay.
I've asked for that to be up.
And you have your retention policies as well for this. So to recap, as we've kind of got to the top, almost to the top of the hour now. We've got a new arkade app, arkade Kasten. I say it's new. We've actually probably had it for a few months now. We've got a bunch of CLIs like I think it's CTL or can do for Canister, Kubester. We've also got Canister as a Kubernetes app alongside some of the others that have been added recently. I've shown us through the first demo how to install minicube with the CSI add-on, how to patch that, install Kasten with its app, how to get the info command and open the UI. We use the token to log into that, a bit more of a secure approach. We then went on to deploy an OpenVAS example where a marketing example, we got email addresses, we're able to see them confirmed or not, take a backup of that locally. I showed you the volume snapshot. Now, that snapshot could have been made by me typing in YAML and applying it, but this just looks so much smarter. Particularly like the retention, I think, is one of the things that I think just adds so much more value to it. Because if I created the snapshots on my own or with cron, I'm not going to get the retention. I have to write code for that, management, schedules.
Yeah,
it just seems like too much work.
And like there's more complex stuff that you should be getting on with is my theory is don't spend too much time backing up. Yes, it's a necessity and we should be protecting our data, but don't spend too much time on it is my kind of motto and saying.
Don't spend too much time on doing it yourself.
Yeah, there you go. Don't spend too much time.
And have you got your 3-2-1 in place?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
Definitely, an important question. So is there any sort of place where people can get in touch with you or with the community to try this out, find out more?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much all over the place, but mostly on Twitter is where I'm most noisy, at Michael Cade1, but also LinkedIn. We're in the process of looking at so that the open source projects all have Slack accounts or Slack channels, Canister, and you'll find them on canister.io, cubester.io. I'm on there, but we're in the process of how do we make those more public. I feel like the world has gone very much into their own Slack channels and there's a lot of information being stored away, but that's another rant for another time. But yeah, that's
okay. Well, we have the blog post as well, which will walk you through my interpretation of Michael's lab. The OpenVAS example I showed you isn't available yet, but there's a similar ones. There's one in my ebook, Serverless for Everyone Else, that uses Postgres. So if you want to go through those steps, or you've got your own application already, why not drop this in? It's free to use, up to 10 nodes. You can certainly try it out and see if it's going to be of value to you. So that is it for us today. Michael, thanks for joining us and for all the help preparing this. If anybody wants the app, just run arkade update. If you don't have arkade yet, head over to arkade.dev and we will both see you on Twitter. All right. Well, goodbye, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Cheers, Alex.